One of the most persistent stories surrounding the UFO phenomenon is that UFOs have made a practice of following American space missions. Several astronauts have been quoted about the deep space encounters, but there has been no official confirmation of such contact. Tonight, in Part 4 of UFOs, The Best Evidence, George Knapp looks at NASA policies regarding ETs. He'll also find out if there is a connection between UFOs and the mutilation of thousands of animals. We should warn you that some of the photos you're about to see are graphic.
In March 1989, the crew of the Space Shuttle Discovery may have discovered something unexpected. A ham radio operator claims to have picked up the voice of Discovery pilot Colonel John Blaha speaking on a secret NASA channel.
Houston, this is Discovery. We still have the alien spacecraft under observance.
Is this really the voice of Blaha claiming to have an alien spacecraft under observance? Listen to the recording again, then listen to Blaha during a later transmission.
Houston, this is Discovery. We still have the alien spacecraft under observance.
It's a shame we can't be here all the time with a permanent manned space station. We ought to get in that direction.
NASA says it is not the voice of Blaha. However, UFOs have reportedly dogged the U.S. space program since the very beginning. UFO researchers claim that NASA's own logs show that virtually all of the early Gemini and Apollo missions encountered UFOs. NASA has explained most of these sightings as space debris or solar flares, but some of its own astronauts have disagreed. UFO sightings have been reported by James Lovell, James McDivitt, Wally Schirra, Deke Slayton, Gordon Cooper, and others. Cooper went so far as to write a letter in 1978 to a United Nations panel on UFOs, saying that he and others had seen UFOs, but that astronauts are very reluctant to discuss the topic. He also stated these are extraterrestrial vehicles visiting this planet from other planets. Cooper has since recanted his statements, but won't say why. Attempts were made to contact Cooper and the other astronauts, but no responses were received. NASA's official policy states that it is not engaged in any UFO research, nor is any other government agency. Still, it's interesting to note that NASA has, since 1977, been the government's only official mouthpiece for UFO information. It's also true that NASA has extensive written policies governing encounters with extraterrestrial life forms, and agency documents contain suggested procedures that should be followed in the event that contact is made with an ET civilization. UFO researchers believe these policies were created because the government knows a lot more about alien life forms than it's telling us. If there is a cover-up, who is calling the shots? Many people believe that there's a secret government within the government, something called MJ-12 or Magic 12 or Majestic. This document is easily the most controversial in UFO circles. It is supposedly a briefing document prepared in 1952 for President-elect Dwight Eisenhower, explaining that a secret group of scientists and military men had been created by President Truman to study the UFO situation and to keep a lid on it. The chief scientist in MJ-12 was said to have been presidential science advisor Dr. Vannevar Bush.
If it's a legitimate document, it establishes, one, that a flying saucer crashed, two, that the wreckage was recovered, 1947, three, that the government has successfully kept that secret since that time, four, that a very high-level group, including, as it happens, the first four directors of Central Intelligence, first Secretary of Defense, etc., was set up, established to deal with that.
Friedman was given a $16,000 grant by a UFO group to research the legitimacy of the MJ-12 document. He has since found other government memos that refer to MJ-12, as well as additional supporting material. However, arguments about the legitimacy of the briefing document have raged in UFO circles for years. Arguments about such minutiae as typewriter brands, date placements, and phraseology.
I've tried to deal with every argument, and there are dozens that have been made by the noisy negativists. All kinds of format and style, and they wouldn't have done this, that, or the other thing. I've found that none of those arguments stand up.
However, Philip KLAS and others have cast so many aspersions on the MJ-12 document that even die-hard UFO buffs now doubt its legitimacy. But they don't automatically reject everything in it. Whoever forged it, if it's a forgery, may have included enough real information to confuse things, and perhaps to lead researchers on a wild alien chase. There is independent confirmation of some of the MJ-12 details from highly reliable sources. Wilbert Smith, a respected scientist for the Canadian government in the 1950s, wrote this top-secret memo to his superiors, describing his talks with American scientists, said Smith in the U.S., the matter is classified higher than the H-bomb. Flying saucers do exist, and they're being studied by a small group headed by Vannevar Bush. This memo was enough to convince the Canadian government to establish its own UFO study program just 2 weeks later. Another source of confirmation is Dr. Robert Sarbacher, president of the Washington Institute of Technology, a key member of the Manhattan Project, and a scientist of impeccable credentials. In this 1983 letter, Sarbacher admitted matter-of-factly that Vannevar Bush was involved with secret UFO research, that crashed disks and alien bodies had been recovered, and that UFOs were highly classified. Even UFO skeptics have had difficulty giving Sarbacher the brush off. If there is or was an MJ-12, it may have had good reasons for keeping UFOs a secret. Perhaps most compelling is that humans can't presume to know why aliens are here, if they are here. The behavior ascribed to ETs by various witnesses is so foreign to us as to seem unfathomable. One of the weirdest activities attributed to aliens is the bizarre mutilation of animals. Scattered stories of carved-up livestock and strange lights in the sky date back to the 1890s in the U.S., but it wasn't until the early 1970s that a pattern began to emerge. A mutilation explosion rocked Midwestern, then Western states. Then, as now, the main targets were cows, although horses, deer, pigs, goats, and other animals have received similar treatment. Today, nearly 15,000 mutilation reports have been received. Most often, the phantom surgeons remove sex organs, udders, rectums, eyes, or ears. The carcasses are usually drained of blood, but blood is rarely found on the ground. There are occasional burn marks on or around the dead beasts, and the cutting is performed with scalpel-like precision.
It's hard to visualize or even comprehend why someone would drive up and kill an animal and then take the male parts out. I don't know. It's beyond me to understand it.
Former State Senator Floyd Lamb has lost 2 prize bulls to the mystery mutilations. Like many ranchers, he's self-reliant and didn't bother to file police reports. His Lincoln County ranch sits adjacent to the Nevada test site, so he's seen his share of odd things over the years, but he hasn't got a clue about who is carving up cattle.
I don't know I don't understand that. Some kook.
Lamb has several neighbors who've also lost cattle. Most of those weren't reported either. In all of Lincoln County, we could find only 6 official mutilation reports dating back to 1975. But many people we talked to had heard of others.
Oh yes, there was several. I hesitate to give a figure, but several.
This is Jane Bradshaw's ranch. She's filed 2 reports of mutilated cows in 8 years. One of the mutilations occurred just yards away from her house. No one heard or saw anything, and as is normal, there were no tracks found. Still, Bradshaw and her children surmised that devil worshippers with poison dart guns were responsible.
You don't just walk up to a big healthy animal like this and tell it to lay down. You know, you've got to do something to it. And it wasn't shot. It wasn't stabbed. I mean, it wasn't killed in any way. So it'd have to have been some kind of a dart or sleeping thing to make it fall.
Roving bands of shadowy Satan worshippers are frequently mentioned as possible culprits in the mutilations. Some researchers insist there just aren't enough devil worshippers out there, especially in rural areas, to commit such widespread mayhem. Former Lincoln County Sheriff Larry Wilkinson personally investigated 3 mutilation cases. He dismisses the notion of knife-wielding Beelzebubs because of the sophistication involved.
The cuts that were made up the legs and the inside of the legs and up the belly. Looked like you could have taken a zipper and zipped the cow right back together again. They were 1/8 serrated cuts were made on the cow. We cut down into the animal and found out that the ball joint was gone, completely gone, off just that one shoulder, and just a perfectly flat cut inside. No bone chips, nothing that you would get from a meat saw where you're leaving pieces of bone particle or anything like that. It was cut, I don't know how.
Some government researchers have blamed predators for some mutilations, but the likelihood of a mountain lion making an incision like a cookie cutter seems remote, and coyotes have never fared well against living, breathing cows. The Bradshaw family insists that neither predators nor any other animal was responsible because not even maggots would come near the carcasses.
Several weeks later, I think the coyotes finally did touch the animal's head, try eating on its head, but they wouldn't touch the body, which is odd because they're scavengers and they'll eat anything.
Documentary filmmaker Linda Howe refers to the mutilations as an alien harvest. Howe has followed up on hundreds of cases and says whatever cut open these cattle didn't use a knife or pinking shears. Pathologists have told Howe that the cuts went between rather than through the animal's microscopic cells. A laser capable of doing such work would approximate the size of an office desk, hard to cart out into an open pasture. Howe's investigations have found an unusually high correlation between mutilations and UFO sightings. In some cases, the strange lights in the sky are soon followed by mystery helicopters, leading some to speculate that the UFO mutilators are being monitored themselves by someone with a lot of helicopters. The lack of blood or tracks, the sophistication of the cuts, occasional tripod-like indentations found near the bodies. To Howe and others, this all adds up to UFOs.
I've never counted UFOs out, and I still don't to this day.
I've seen some weird things over this mountain at night. That's towards the
Over
test
the test site.
Then look, what do they do?
Well, I just remember some kind of a bright light going up and coming down.
Whitley Strieber, who's written 2 best-selling books about alien abductions of humans, doesn't think the mutilations of cows are so weird.
It could be that if they are visitors from another planet, they use the cattle for the same reason we do. And it's true that the things that are done to the cattle are quite horrible, but if you think the visitors are the only ones doing horrible things to the cattle, I recommend that you visit a slaughterhouse.
But is it food or some other use the UFOs have for cows? Scientists have only recently discovered a remarkable similarity between the chromosomes of cattle and of people. The possibility of some genetic experiment associated with this strange harvest is enough to make one shudder. The proximity of the Lincoln County incidents to the Nevada test site and the ultra-secret Area 51 is also of interest to some. There's a long-standing suspicion that Area 51 is an alien haven, a place where UFOs drift through the night sky. The stories recently prompted radio host Billy Goodman to organize a field trip to the outskirts of 51. Nearly 100 people unfolded their lawn chairs, unfurled their American flags, and sat back to await E.T.
What we need is a real strong, positive attitude. When you get yourself in position, zero in on your area and try to make something come your way.
They don't get clouds in the summertime out here. They don't get much rain out here. This is a classic mothership appearance.
But those expecting a mothership were somewhat disappointed. On this night, there were several false sightings, car lights, stars, and other explainable objects. And it all took place under the watchful eye of Lincoln County deputies.
Well, I came up here to try and see if I could see some UFOs, basically.
But I've driven further on for a lot crazier things.
Straight up!
Straight up!
It's moving, look how fast it's going. I knew, my ears rang when it came over.
Despite the ringing ears, no flying saucers were seen while our camera was present, but the faithful say they saw unexplainable lights later that night. These days, Area 51, adjacent to Groom Lake, has become a nightly desert hangout for UFO believers. Is it a modern folk legend, or is something really going on here? Tomorrow, a scientist who says he worked on flying saucers. George Knapp, Eyewitness News 8.
I guess we'll get more on that tomorrow.